Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's presentation. The topic of this week is military violence, and I will be presenting on the article called Between Trauma and Resilience by Agatha Schwartz and Tatiana Tekshiva. The image that you see in the background is an image of the Srebrenica Victim Memorial in Bosnia, where 8,372 Bosnian civilians were killed during a 10-day massacre. And this is where they've been laid to rest. A quick presentation overview. I'll briefly introduce the authors and sort of link their personal life to the article itself. And then I'll briefly pinpoint the main arguments that I found of the article. And I want to dedicate a bit of time to speaking of the evidence that they relied on, because I think it can help us become more conscientious researchers, especially when researching about something so difficult as trauma itself. And finally, the last slide is why it is important. And I want to try and dedicate the most amount of time to that slide because I find that when we speak about trauma specifically, we have a tendency to want to do something more humane, or that we believe that the more humane approach is to let people be and to let the trauma be in the past so that people don't have to relive the trauma or be re-traumatized again. But I find that their discussion about why it is important to sort of, I don't want to say re-traumatize the people, but unearth it again is because it's our duty to do so, and in order to create a more just and complete understanding of history. Also, the picture that you see, I believe to your left, is a picture of West Berliners gathering at the newly erected Berlin Wall, while a East German soldier patrols on the other side. So the authors of the article are Agatha Schwartz, who's a professor of German and world literature and cultures at the University of Ottawa. She has a PhD from Queen's University in German language and literature, but more interestingly, for the sake of this article at least, is that she has an MA and a BA from the University in Belgrade in modern-day Serbia. She started her MA in 1990, which means that she would have been in Serbia during the beginning phases of what would have led to the Yugoslavian Civil War. Her research focuses on trauma narratives and feminist and women writing. Tatiana Tekshiva is the second author of this article, and she is a professor at the English department in St. Mary's University in Halifax, but she also teaches in the Women and Gender Studies department. Similarly to Professor Agatha Schwartz, Professor Tatiana Tekshiva has a BA from the University in Belgrade, and she completed her BA in 1992, which means that she actually would have been present in modern-day Serbia during what was the actual beginning parts of the war. And her research focuses on the idea of motherhood and trauma. So the main argument, I believe, can be pinpointed into four main points. And the arguments that the authors want us, the readers, to understand is that one cannot fully comprehend the idea of trauma without investigating the history of those who have been silenced. The lasting impacts of war rape follows the survivor throughout life and does not disappear just because the war itself has finished. And more specifically, there's a false narrative that the fact that a war ends would provide people with a sense of comfort, especially women, with a sense of comfort to return to normal life, which is not the case, especially for the women who have endured sexual violence. Rather, this research demonstrates the fact that the women are silenced by the society they live in, who wants to move on from the trauma of the war, but also of a broader silencing where sexual violence is normally silenced and not discussed. This means that their feelings become cemented behind a wall of silence, and the only way they're able to break away from this wall of silence is by having an empathetic listener. The author also wants to remind the reader of the importance of integrating female or women's voices into the official narratives of war history. And what's interesting is that although we all acknowledge that women have broadly been neglected in history books, they are even more so neglected in war history narratives because the soldiers tend to be male and the politicians that initiate war tend to be male as well. So the space that is where women are discussed in war history is minimal at best. And finally, and in my opinion, the most important argument that the authors make in the article is that rape is a form of genocide when conducted during wartime. They discussed the fact that rape against women during war is seen as a genocidal erasure of the nation and is a form of tactics of disrespecting the nation through disrespecting the female body and agency of the woman. So speaking briefly about the evidence, the authors rely on something called life writing, which in this case is composed of diary accounts of the rape survivors and interviews of rape survivors as well. And the importance of introducing life writing into trauma research is that I'm going to quote, history written by male historians tend to treat rape as in wars as an isolated phenomenon, with the consequence that historical memory is largely informed by a masculinist perspective, erasing women's traumatic experiences. So if we briefly deconstruct, I don't actually know why I say briefly, I'm not sure it's going to be brief at all, but if we deconstruct the German accounts, they come from the Second World War, where German mass rapes from that time are estimated to number between 860,000 to 2 million survivors. Yet these drastic numbers will most likely never be fully confirmed due to the silencing nature of rape survivors. The authors, as I mentioned before, rely on diaries, and they rely on 3 diaries. One anonymous diary called A Woman in Berlin, and 2 German teenagers by the name of Gabby Kopp and Leonie Bialis. Sorry, I can't pronounce names. All 3 rape survivors echo a similar experience of emptiness and numbness, and this numbness manifested itself in the 2 teenagers losing their period for a temporary amount of time. For Kopp, it lasted 7 years, and it makes one wonder if the absence of her period functioned as a constant reminder of the trauma that she endured. The idea of re-traumatization will further be discussed in the last slide. All 3 also echo the significance of the empathetic listener who provided a space to air out their feelings and their emotions in order to start healing the wounds that they have. The empathetic listener also obviously provides a space for dealing with their emotions when they live in a society where sexual trauma is considered taboo and is necessary or is made oh God. Sorry, I lost my train of thoughts, but if we move on to the Bosnian accounts, they are from the Yugoslavian Civil War in the 1990s, and they're made up of the Bosnian survivors who recount the rape that they experienced by Serbian nationalist forces who engaged in a broader campaign of ethnic cleansing of Muslim Bosnians and the ethnic heritage. It became clear that a significant aspect of the strategy involved the systematic use of genocidal rape and enforced impregnation of the Bosnian women as a form of disrespecting the nation. Previous survivors of the Yugoslavian wars have spoken to journalists. However, due to manipulation of their words and misrepresentation of their experience, the authors found it difficult to encourage women to speak about their experience, even to academic researchers. This hesitation demonstrates the lingering shame and re-traumatization of that the women face when thinking about the memory itself. And I think that life writing as a methodology then provides these women, or actually the authors do confirm it, but that life writing provides the survivors with a more comforting space to discuss something as difficult as their sexual trauma. The authors interview 8 women and 8 NGO leaders, and they found that the Bosnian survivors felt similar emotions as their German counterparts, and similar as their German counterparts, they needed an empathetic listener in order to live a somewhat normal life after the fact. By airing their silenced experience, the women felt like they gained a sense of agency, and this agency in turn changed their feelings of shame from the sexual trauma to that of a feeling of pride for having reclaimed their agency. Although some of the Bosnian sexual assault survivors did get a time in court to face the Bosnian war criminals, many of them did not feel like they felt vindicated, even though they had met in court. So creating a local and communal support group provided the women with the space of healing and a place where they could feel vindicated of the crimes that they endured. So why is it important? Well, as mentioned before, in previous weeks, we've been discussing what the female or the women's role in society at large is, and how the respectability of women is often in question when we're speaking about women in history. And the authors state that the wartime rape is oftentimes viewed as an inevitable part of war and warfare tactics. The act of sexual violence and rape functions as a deeply rooted form of disrespecting the nation itself. The women's body functioned as a secondary battleground, one in which the defiling and the power dynamics will linger long after the war. In more recent times, the lasting effect of wartime rape and sexual violence, quote, has been recognized as a strategy of ethnic cleansing and as a tool of genocide, end of quote. The function of the female body and the respectability of a woman is mirrored in the respectability of the nation. And this can be seen in our previous discussion, as I mentioned, about the female and women's role in society, where we discuss that women are often attributed in the larger frame of history as the mothers of nation and the ones who provide the healing and the comfort. Although the act of rape might have happened years or even decades ago, the German accounts demonstrate that re-traumatization of their own experience when they experienced the re-traumatization of their own experience when they heard about other women enduring rape around the world. This forced them to reopen wounds and sort of break down that wall of silence and seek an empathetic listener. By carving out space for life writing, the authors effectively reintegrate women's war experience, and their voices help complicate our understanding of war history for the better. Moreover, the transnational nature of the accounts demonstrate the global lineage, or perhaps a heritage, of reoccurring sexual violence as a form of controlling women and the nation at large, which delays and sometimes completely stunts the growth and rebuilding after the fact. Now, I'm speaking both about the rebuilding of a nation, but also rebuilding or reclaiming of the agency of the women. Oftentimes, our discussion of war veterans are that of gratitude for their service and their willingness to risk their lives for the ideological improvement of the world and stopping damaging forces. Yet I believe that these accounts, and this article in particular, complicate our relationship with and our glorification of the war itself. and the participants of the war. The authors quote researchers such as, and please excuse my pronunciation, Mariana Muraviva and Miriam Gebhardt, who demonstrate that mass rape is not unique to the Soviet army during the Second World War. End quote. The Western allies also committed mass rapes, end of quote. This is not to say that the soldiers were not brave for risking their lives, but we should, and that we should not appreciate their service, but rather we need to rethink the glorification, as some of the soldiers inevitably were sexual assault aggressors. Both German and Bosnian women's narrative, told in their own voices, were unwelcomed for decades, and the women who suffered the violence never received any official recognition or compensation. So the only way that we can vindicate these women are by creating a space, not only on a communal level, but also on a global and academic level, a space of healing by bringing these accounts to life. As the Bosnian women confirm, it is through dialogue and emotional exploration that one can begin to heal. And this becomes incredibly important when we are talking about creating peace. You know, we can't create peace when people are not given the space of healing, and we can only do that clearly by creating space for them to discuss their experience. And to the final point, there's a duality of trauma and a clear dichotomy, and it's one of agency and victimization. So although the survivors have been silenced and their experience were not taken seriously, their reclamation of their own voices helped them deal with their experience and provided them with a sense of agency over their lives, which had been altered and questioned during their rape experience. The function of speaking out helped these survivors shatter some of the victim blaming and the mythologies surrounding rape, while at the same time providing them with a broader sense of justice on a global scale. And this happens not only through the International Tribunal that redefined what it meant to, redefined what crimes against humanity meant, but also in an academic sense and a social sense, where we are providing space and for the experience of the women, and providing a space of healing where they get to completely discuss everything that happened to them on their own terms and in methods that they feel comfortable with. And that's it for my presentation. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in class. Take care. Bye.